All right, everybody, welcome out to the Three Martini Solution special podcast episode for Under the Banner of Heaven, episode 7, which is the last episode in the series. Ryan, Kyle, Jessica, Casey, everybody's got their drinks ready to go to talk about this last one. Maybe we should start out by just kind of everybody giving your two thoughts. Was this a good way to wrap up the series? Opinions, thoughts?
If I have to pick yes or no, it's yes.
You don't have to pick yes or no. You can pick whatever you want.
Yeah, I think we should narrow my responses.
All right, you say yes. Why yes? What did you like about it? You thought, just go ahead.
I don't know. It tied it up in a pretty little bow for me. And I actually love that they ended it with him still doing some of those traditional LDS things with his family, but still being with his mom at the end and just being like, you know what? I also think being here with you is all I need. So like you can, it still left the viewer to decide, you know, where Pyrie's going to land. But I kind of appreciated that part of it. So for me, I walked away feeling like, great, now it's done. I didn't feel like, oh, we could have used 3 more episodes.
It seemed like a good, realistic ending where sometimes you feel like those types of shows where if it's not based on a real story or something like that, where they try and wrap everything up so neat and so nice and either spend an episode or the last 15 minutes like showing Pyrie like getting back into the church all the way or totally separating from the church and kind of like trying to make things very clean cut and officially over. Whereas this definitely seemed a more real world situation. Or
leave you with a cliffhanger where you feel like there's going to be more to this story, right? Like I really felt like it tied it all up.
Okay. Well, let me just, the only thing that I kind of was expecting that they didn't do, that which I kind of felt wanting, is they didn't make any effort to really tell the rest of the story that happens afterwards. Like nothing about the prosecution, nothing about, even though this is, a fictionalized account of things that happened, the real Lafferty brothers, here's what happened, or anything like that, which I was kind of expecting. I don't know if it was completely necessary. Emily kind of has had this idea several times throughout it, where she said to me, are they not going to fully explain that because they want people to look it up? Which is a weird thing for a TV show to do. Like, we're not going to tell you the entire story, but we're going to trust that you can, Google whatever you want to figure out.
I wonder how much of it is, like Jessica's saying, not a cliffhanger, is actually a cliffhanger where they will have a 2 or 3 episodes of like, no, this is like the trial, and a more non-fictionalized, just kind of like a more documentary narrative of like, all right, so you watch this show, now let's go back through and kind of break down the differences between what was fictionalized, what wasn't. Let's look at the prosecution and what actually happened, and trying to drum up interest for that part of it. Like, I don't think it would be as fun. Like if they just released 3 or 4 episodes of the trial, I don't know if I would have watched it, but after watching the show, I'm invested. Like I would definitely watch another couple episodes about like the real life, what actually happened in the aftermath and all that.
And I hear what you're saying, Ryan, but like I immediately went to the most recent kind of like movie based off of real life, which was King Richard. And at the very end, they do give you like factual kind of tidbits about Serena, and like you see like the actual photos of them from their childhood, and like there's this kind of compare and contrast. I don't obviously think they could do that with this, but yeah, usually when a based on a true story show is given, you do get that little
Breakfast Club close.
like
Right.
This is what, and they do that like on a lot of Hulu shows. Like we watched Candy, which was based off of a real life story, and they gave you like
Watch Candy.
I didn't watch it.
So we're just sharing information with
Yeah.
our world.
I derail it. Casey, what was yours? You happy, or are you still left with questions?
I thought for the type of show that it ended okay. If I had to choose a yes or no, I would choose yes. I don't think it was trying to be a documentary. I don't think it was trying to be too close to the facts. That's why it says inspired. I think Black was trying to do that for probably a number of different reasons. I think the questions he's trying to ask are not what actually happened. He's trying to look at it more deeply in a societal critique sort of way. I think that's why he has created some of the brothers that are not real, right? That are sort of composite. That's why we have Pyrie. That's why we have Taba. That's why it's all inspired about certain things. That's why there's the whole narrative tool of Alan and Pyrie in the jail having all of the, two men in a room talking and doing the explanatory stuff. I was happy with, they left the climax to the murder, and Pyrie's story was anticlimactic, leaving it in ambiguity, which I think is where most of us find ourselves often in things. Like our lives are never neatly tied up in a bow. Like certain events will happen, but it really just leads us from one ambiguity into the next. And I actually liked that for Pyrie. Like you really don't know where he ends up. Like right. I was expecting it for him to be a testimony meeting, and he was either going to bear his testimony or not, or have a crisis.
Yeah.
But he would have stolen the climax from what really happened. And also I think he would have stolen the climax because they made Brenda more of a center this time and gave her more of a voice, and also Diana, which I appreciated that. And so Pyrie needed to take a step back, which was fine. And so, his thing was like, when he kind of pushes back on his mom and she doesn't know he's pushing back. Just you being here is a miracle enough for me. Is that okay? And she's like, of course. Yeah. I thought that was a great, nice ending for him, letting you really focus on the question that I think the show's really asking is, what about women? Of course, I think a valid critique is they're using men to tell women's stories. Shocker. Not that ever happens in other media, but but that's a really great question, right? How does Diana handle it? I don't know exactly what Diana actually did with Matilda and stuff. We know that they both did leave or whatever, but I mean, that was an interesting thing. I mean, I loved I thought that the climax too for the show was the gas station scene where like the Boy Scouts don't do anything. No man does anything at all to stand up to stop this.
Right.
And so she realizes it's gotta be me. And once again, badass sister steps up and like does what she's gotta do to make things, she takes it into her own hands to do it. And I thought it was well acted because you could see her looking. She's like, institution, are you going to help me? No. Boy Scouts? No. Church people? Clearly that's why the one guy in the white shirt was there, right? There's all of these people representing different aspects of male life, and not one of them helps her out. They all abandon her. And so she's like, fine. And so she takes the reins and does what she's got to do, which is sort of a theme of the whole story. In so many ways, there was a lot of righteous female anger in this episode, which I love to see, represent, is great. So I was happy. It felt
like that was building throughout the whole series, right? Like it definitely was the grand finale of that, but building up to it. But you saw it in a real way this last episode.
I struggled with this episode. It's always hard for me to watch things like that. I couldn't sit in the room and watch the first part where the scene with Brenda and stuff. I had to come in and out because it was just a lot. And, they built it up really well for a thriller and all that kind of stuff. The fact that they went back to her house, I have no idea if they actually did or not, but they emphasized the randomness of the killing and how awful it was. No one really knows what happened in that house other than Dan. And I'm not sure that he's talked about it, but I mean, I'm glad they gave her a voice in a moment, but but it was horrifying.
Heavy. Yep.
Because when she hears her daughter cry and she knows her daughter is also not safe.
Yeah.
And she absolutely nothing.
Yep.
Like, that is so deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So there is I guess somebody, and I can't remember the name of the person, but if you look for Dan Lafferty interviews on YouTube, I know there's at least one up that somebody put up and added some commentary to, and it was taken from maybe a radio personality or somebody in Utah. I'm not very familiar, but on I think in the early 2000s, maybe did a telephone interview with Dan Lafferty, and I think it's about an hour long. I started listening to it. I was going to take some notes and do some things, but
is it the Radio Free Mormon?
Yes, I believe so. So there is that out there, but I haven't listened to the whole thing yet. But the part that I've listened to is very unsettling to hear him describe the murders, because
he has no remorse. Like he doesn't think he did anything wrong.
Right. Yeah. It's
well, and isn't that kind of what Pyrie says about like capture him alive? Because if his blood sheds like that, they're victorious.
right.
So there was almost like a little ego of like, not only do we need to get him, but we need to get him alive because he'll think that he's dying in the name of greatness.
Yeah, well, that's why you see him hitting his own face, because he knows that's why they made that emphasis, because that's why his brother says, "Oh, your blood is not going to be spilled because whatever, this whole warped blood atonement stuff, like just whatever." So then he gives himself a bloody nose so that some of his blood can be on the ground. I'm like, okay, wow. I just,
yeah.
All right. Well, Well, and I just wanted to clarify one thing. I think it wrapped up everything. Like, if I'm forced to pick yes or no, I would say yes. I think it wrapped everything up. I guess I was expecting the epilogue to it a little bit. When I didn't see it, I was like, oh, okay. But I think because so much of it has been fictionalized, the case you brought up, that's probably why they didn't feel it necessary to do it. But
Kyle also, like, before we even started watching it, he was like, how long is it? So sometimes when they do, like, the series finale, like, you get an extra 30 minutes on it or something like that. And when we saw it was the exact same length of all the other episodes, really locked in to capture every moment. But yeah, no, a lot of times they do take it that extra length in a finale. But
so what was other than the murders? I mean, I think those were shocking. I agree they were hard to watch. Is there anything else that stood out as surprising to you about the episode?
How they try to fund their murder spree or killing list, like just hang out in Vegas, just like I'm gonna gamble. Like,
don't you think if the one brother had bet on the horse that Ron told him to, like, they would have come into the money earlier?
right.
Like I was just shocked that. I mean, I guess I don't know for sure, but I assume gambling is against Mormon culture. Like, that's one of the things. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not Mormon, so I don't know, but with caffeine and alcohol and stuff like that not being, I would have assumed gambling is also on that list of things you shouldn't do. And then to fund your holy mission or your revelation and killing a bunch of people.
And knocking up a cocktail waitress? Yeah, Kyle, none of that's proved.
Well, I think it was interesting because I do think gambling is definitely looked down upon in the church, but it's not an explicit commandment not to do it. I don't know of anything ever taught explicitly saying you shouldn't gamble. I don't think Well, maybe they've come out and said you shouldn't gamble, but it's not like one of the big sins that's going to keep you out of the temple or something. Or am I wrong?
But isn't that part of the show's point? Is that anyone who elevates themselves to this level of I'm in charge, the rules do not apply to me. Like, Dan Lafferty is like, guess what? I do get to have sex with whoever because God's giving these women to me. He blessed me with a strong sex drive or whatever he said. So gambling, easy, right? There's a nice New Testament scripture. We're going to use render to Caesar what is Caesar's. You can bend out not very far and be like, we can use this filthy lucre to stick it to the man because we don't need to pay taxes because that's my hard earned money. But this other money we can use that to do stuff. We'll just convert. We'll launder the money from filthy lucre to holy riches. Whatever. I mean, come on.
Well, there was that exchange.
Those guys, and I can, give me 2 seconds. Maybe that's why I'm a lawyer.
I got this, guys.
Well, there was that exchange between Taba and Pyrie, kind of something very similar, like, oh, well, they wouldn't be having sex with her. And he's like, come on, right? Because Pyrie's still trying to see things through the lens of a mainstream Mormon, what they would think is acceptable or not. And Taba's like, no, they're going to make up whatever they want to make up to fit their own personal desires. End of story. It doesn't even matter the reasoning. It's what will they end up doing. And I think that is it. Let me ask you this. What did you guys think of the whole Mountain Meadows Massacre thread through this? That seemed to be kind of like the one historical Mormon event that they're saving for the grand finale is the Mountain Meadows Massacre. What did you think about that?
I don't even know if I want to share this thought, but it's my honest, real thought. When they pull the wool over their eyes and kill all the men and then go after the women and children that are running away and they shoot that one woman point blank, I was like, yeah, right. They would have enslaved her and gotten a whole lot more out of that woman than just killing her dad. For me, that's like, I don't remember those stories. Those were never talked about in my Mormon upbringing. So
they don't tell about that.
But even just the what did you call it? The Meadow Massacre?
Mountain Meadow Massacre.
And there's another one where they're on the mountain and those. But I learned about those stories so much later in life. Jessica,
it
just seems.
Did you know our family's relationship to the Mountain Meadows Massacre?
Please don't share that. Please, I can die.
I would love to hear that, Ryan.
Never knowing that, Ryan. Please speak no further.
The moon or the river?
Kyle, that's too close to home. You know
right.
what that story means to me.
I'm sorry, Casey, you dropped out.
Have you looked at the Lafferty family tree, Ryan?
The Lafferty family tree? No, I have not looked at the Lafferty.
I have my maiden name in it.
Let's look it up real quick. I just want to read.
Hatch Pope.
Now I'm bowing out.
Let's see. Where's it's the one.
Yikes, guys. No research.
So
I did like in that Mount Meadows thing, though, when the president came in and was talking to Taba about, like, hey, we're on the same side here. Our people got together. And then he left and he's like, fuck that guy. That's not what I was told. Like,
we had
he's a liar.
Right.
Like, just seeing how you can use that.
My thought when I saw that scene is, that 70 would not be bringing up the Mount Meadow Massacre. He would not be bringing up Mount Meadows. That's something that the church has pretended didn't happen or didn't exist for many, many, many decades now, since it happened, really. And even when they put up some sort of monument to acknowledge something, never really came out and said sorry, never really stood up and accepted any sort of responsibility for it. I think just try to kind of, let's just put that behind us and not think about it. But it was as horrific, I think, as it was portrayed. And yeah, it was all bad. The part that I found interesting about that, and I do want to talk more about it. Jessica can put her fingers in her ears because we do have a family history, a close family history involved in it. Or just drink more, Jessica. But when the 70 was walking out, he dusted off his feet, and I kind of laughed out loud. And what that is, and I don't know what scripture, what the reference is, but there's some reference within the church about if somebody does you wrong, you dust off your feet. It is what Alan said afterwards. You dust off your feet, and I'm going to condemn you at the last day, whatever. But it was funny because I think the quote says that an elder in the church can do this. And so when you're an elder in the church out on a mission, I don't know about your mission, Casey, but in mine, there was more than a few elders that had talked about whether they should do it and when they should do it. And I was like, what are you talking about? And that might have been I don't know if it was on my mission or something. That was something that if I'd heard of it before my mission, I didn't really understand it. And I guess I don't even really understand it. But when he did it, I'm like, I don't think they're really doing that. Are they, Casey?
When I saw that, I assumed it was a fictionalized thing to kind of drive home a point. I did not, for 1 second, think that was actually
anything.
A thing.
Oh, that is actually a thing.
That's actually a thing. I've never seen it done. It's more involved than that. But it's
what's involved, Casey? I don't even know what's involved.
I'm gonna have to start wearing pants so I can do that now.
I was gonna say every time I get mad at Kyle, I'm not gonna flip him off or give him the silent treatment.
Just dust your feet off. Yeah.
Let you know exactly where you stand with me.
All right, what is it, Casey? What's involved and where did it come from?
So Jesus brought it up.
Oh.
Saying that, so that's where they're getting it. Matthew talks about it, but there's some sort of ordinance. Probably you have to ritually take the dust off of your feet or whatever, and there's some sort of prayer or something that people say. I'm not exactly sure where it is. It's not like you can find it in the handbook of instructions or anything, but it's one of those things that everybody talks about. Few people actually know, and they probably keep a lid on that because it's one of the things they can't get rid of. Because it's sort of nice, but I think they keep that away so it's sort of relatively harmless and stuff like. I mean, he was doing that, but I'm 90% sure that's not exactly how it goes down. But I mean, it made a great point. So the thing is, yeah, it's I've only heard of it in like the strictly missionary context. That when you are, sharing the gospel with folks or whatever, people rejecting you are nasty or whatever, then you're supposed to do it, which is the context in which Jesus talks about it too. Okay. But anyway.
Well, if you didn't hate the guy when he told Brenda her calling was to save these brothers, you hate him now, right? Like, don't you dust your shoe off to way to really seal the deal and how much of an asshole you are.
So what was you were looking up the Lafferty family tree. What was that about, Casey?
There's a hatch in there.
Oh, there is? Well, there's a lot of hatches around.
I can't find the family tree that has the hatch in it, but it's like the hatch married in there somewhere. Like not the kids level, but like the patriarch level or whatever. Back in the.
Well, I think the hatches
on in this show.
Well, let's see. There's the Lafferty Hatch connection. We'll see if that. No, if that doesn't. Sorry.
Well, the Hatches have been involved in the church since.
I'm not a genealogist.
Yeah.
I was just looking at it. I'm like, Hatch. I know some Hatches.
Well, the Hatches have been in there since like 1832 or 36 or something like that, in the 1830s sometime. So, yeah, I'm sure they've married. And in the line that Jessica and I are from is kind of like a pretty small offshoot of that.
only a couple hundred first cousins.
I mean, I definitely identify as Native American. Maybe that's
No, maybe you shouldn't. Because I know what percentage you are. It's pretty
but
small.
Like one tiny little thread is the one I'm going to hold on
Right.
to.
So,
I feel like that's...
what you're referring to, Jessica, our great-great-grandmother was a full-blooded American Indian, right, or Native American. I think the story is half Paiute, half Navajo, she was. And
is there a play about that?
there is a play.
Again, Kyle.
There is a play that our aunt did.
Oh.
Yeah. Jessica was in it. Jessica was in it for a while, the play.
I was. My first debut.
Were you a science
My
interpreter?
aunt knew a star when she saw one. Listen, it was a beautiful story. And I will say, like, I definitely, when I look back on my experience with our family, we have some Jack Mormons, right?
Right.
And our Aunt Sharon being one of them that did go back into our genealogy. And there's like this process of like almost handpicking like what you like from the church and what it presents. But Ryan knows this. I love my aunt, who has since passed, in a very real way, because I feel like she instilled not just those good qualities, but a little bit of common sense. And the one part in this last episode that really resonated with me on kind of a personal level is when Taba takes Pyrie out into the middle of nowhere and kind of has that like come to Jesus moment, if you will, and like take a breath. Let's figure out what we're doing. Are we going to Utah? Are we staying in Vegas? Are we headed to Florida? Like, what are we going to do? And the personal thing that resonated with me is the Holy Ghost, right? Like the Holy Ghost speaks to you and you have to listen to it. This is not revelation. This isn't anything else, but like you're taught from a very early age that you have the Holy Ghost, right? It's part of the Trinity. And
Mormons believe in the Trinity?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Am I wrong?
That's a big Catholic thing.
Am I wrong?
I didn't know it was a Mormon thing.
Well, the Trinity, the concept of the Trinity is a little different, but yeah.
Okay, my bad. Well, you guys all knew what I was talking about.
We believe in those three, but the Trinity is those three, but they are one.
But
that's a gross
maybe
oversimplification.
True Christian sectarian fashion, we're going to use a different word and a different way of describing basically the same thing. And I know now Christians and Mormon Christians are all going to argue with me about that, but there we go.
Okay. See, that
it's not different enough to really argue about. There's other things that are more important, right?
Isn't it enough different? I mean, I feel like the smallest thing is what people argue about and not like the big things.
Oh, that's true.
Honestly, I decided pretty early on, and Ryan can maybe attest to this, that like I just had a different thought process than what was being told to me early on in my childhood and in the Mormon religion. And one of my biggest like epiphanies was the Holy Ghost isn't speaking to me. My conscience, like I'm a good person and I have my own moral compass and I don't need anything to dictate that to me. I know it. Like those feelings I'm having is me, not some other being. And I feel like, and maybe that's just my personal moment within that one scene of this episode, was that's essentially what Taba was trying to tell Pyrie. Like, trust yourself.
Yeah.
Listen to yourself.
Well, I think what you're describing is something that, I think the way you grew up, the way I grew up, I think we were raised, or we learned, each of us in our own way in our family to really think for ourselves. And that's a real thing. But I think that there are people who have been raised in the church who, have really truly believed that everything good that ever happens to them just comes from God or the Holy Ghost or somehow church related. And I think that when they have a faith crisis, if you will, they start questioning things, and they can feel lost. Like that's what Pyrie is doing. Is kind of showing us that, what do I do if I don't have the Holy Ghost? Where is my compass? That's what they refer to it in the show. And they kind of have to learn what you just described. Like, it might be intuitive to you, like, oh, this is my conscience. Everybody has a conscience. I'll just listen to my conscience. I don't need a church to tell me to be a good person. I could just listen to my conscience. Well, I don't think that is as intuitive for a lot of people. And so I think that scene in particular is addressing that, because I do think it is one of those big scary things that a lot of people face on their way either out of the church or in their journey of just learning more about what the church is and is not. And so it becomes a very scary thing for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned it enough, and I don't want to do this thing where we keep mentioning the thing. What our family history is, Jessica, and you can close your ears real quick. So our ancestor that married that full-blooded Native American woman, her name was Sarah Maraboots, and Sarah Maraboots Dyson. And I think Dyson is the name of the family that she lived with for a short period of time. But anyway, but he was Ira Hatch, and he was one of the named people who I think it's not clear whether he was out at the Mountain Meadows Massacre, but it was very clear that there was 3 individuals that escaped from that area and had gone further west to go find help, because the show doesn't really explain it fully, but it's my understanding that it was a period of time. It was there was a period of time that this wagon train was being attacked. And so these 3 individuals took off, and then our ancestor with some Paiute Indians went and tracked them down and took care of business. They didn't go find help. And so
wait, no, I need more clarification on.
Yeah.
So wait, like bad guy, good guy.
Oh, he's definitely a bad guy in this situation.
Oh no.
So he was called by Brigham Young to go be an interpreter for the church and be kind of like the go-between between the church and the Native American tribes. Apparently he spoke like a number of languages. Like he spoke a number of,
right,
particularly Native American language. He's very good with that. And so he was one of the contact people. And so when the Mormons got the Paiutes to help him out, they needed an interpreter to do that. It's speculated that he was one of, if not, involved in doing that, because he did have a relationship with the Paiutes, and definitely. What's that?
He's the one that tricked them?
It's unclear. It is unclear what he did for the Mountain Meadows Massacre event. It's speculated that in the organization of it, he may have played a big role in it, because that was his job, essentially at the time, with the particular unit. Like he was in
that goes against everything I was ever told. Like I thought he was like a friend of the Native Americans. Like he was the one to like bring the church. Well, okay, no.
Well, I don't want to totally destroy. So it's not very clear. It's not like the church kept records of who, what, when, where, why, how at the time. I think he was friendly with he was, I think, at least after this time, he was known as the guy that can come in on behalf of the church and smooth things over when things went south in the relationship between the church and the Native American tribes in the area. And so I think he was widely respected and whatnot. But for this particular thing, the Mountain Meadows Massacre, this military group from the church based, he was part of a militia that was attached, I believe, to that group. It was his job to interface between the church and the Native Americans. I think there might have been others. I don't think that they have a name of anybody who was there and helped organize the Mount Meadows Massacre.
Are you telling me this is when they decide to not keep detailed records? Right? We keep detailed records.
Yeah, for some reason, those records have been lost.
Absolutely everything.
Right. But afterwards, there was a federal investigation that came through. And so maybe because of what his role was within and because he was in there, they identified him as somebody that was probably involved, like highly likely involved, without anybody really pointing the figure at him. But, the evidence would point to his involvement. But where his name gets mentioned specifically is when these three individuals escape from the wagon train and go off to go find help, him and I think 3 or 4 Paiute people go after these 3 individuals, and they run into other people traveling the same roads. And, through those conversations with them, it's determined that they're looking for some people. They gave a story of why they were tracking down these particular individuals. And then there was some other stories on their way back that business was taken care of. They don't know if our ancestor or the Native Americans he was with actually did the killings, but they know that the people never survived. And so it's very ambiguous as to what happened, other than these 3 individuals that definitely did escape, and they were definitely being tracked down, hunted by our relative, and these Native Americans didn't get to any help. And so when there's the federal investigation done of the whole incident, his name gets mentioned as one of the people that were involved in different parts of the whole thing. Yeah.
That is very hard to stop.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. But there's other stories where he does good things, but that's definitely not a good one.
No.
So, but there's different things like I can't remember. Jessica said you didn't hear these stories growing up. I think that's one of the big points of maybe the book and the TV show, just generally, is that that the church doesn't talk about these. And in a certain part of me says, well, why would they? like a certain part is like, what are you going to do? Being like, especially to like a new convert of the church coming in, you're going to be like, hey, here's all the really crappy stuff we've done for the last couple hundred years. Like I mean, that doesn't make sense. But at the same time, what gets me sometimes is when these things are known, when they are brought out, when there comes a point in time where there should be a statement by them, what is that statement from the church? And oftentimes it's left wanting, if I'm just being frank.
I feel like transparency wins people over. Like, I mean, sweeping it under the rug is going to be so, aversive to people, where transparency can actually calm those fears or questions. So it seems like the more you try to hide it, the more you condone it. I don't know.
What's that for religion? Hide stuff.
Not just religion, but
Well, so an interesting thing. So when you say,
but you see that in so many other things too.
Well, picking up on kind of what Kyle just mentioned as an offshoot, like I was talking with some friends who really have no other connection to the LDS faith other than knowing me and my wife. And so I was asking them questions because I'm like, you guys have no, but they watched the series. So I was asking, was it entertaining? It's you kind of lose some perspective when you have such a close connection to it. Is, I'm interested in it maybe for different reasons than somebody who's never been in the church is interested in it. So we're just asking things. And one of the things that they brought out is they say, yeah, there's all this horrible stuff, but at the same time, every religion has horrible stuff. And, something that I know I've said before and other people have said, but that these people who are not affiliated with the Mormon Church said, it's such a new church that they haven't had, 2,000 years to clean up the record, to backtrack. And these things typically happen slowly. I mean, we're less than 200 years into this religion. And so, at this point in time, they haven't had the long process of culling the bad history, disavowing what they need to disavow, making the major moves within that. Now, I'm not trying to defend the church or anything, but I think there's a practicality to it when you compare it to other more established religions that have been around for centuries and centuries and centuries, if not thousands of years, that they can, they can make those changes and those, you take a snippet of a time, whatever.
Yeah, and I don't even know how much of it is like you're saying culling the history, but like if you just sweep things under the rug a lot, or like don't talk about things, don't actively try and hide them, but like don't actively talk about them over the course of hundreds and thousands of years, the things you don't talk about just disappear. I mean, like,
and
it happened in Catholicism and Judaism, and
that's why it's a PR strategy that
just don't talk about it; it'll go away.
You look at American history, another good example.
Well, and the church gets started in the early 1800s. The printing press had already been invented, but now in the early 1800s, those printing presses are becoming more and more common, right? The incident that led to Joseph Smith being lynched, essentially, or maybe that's the wrong term, killed by the mob, all started because he destroyed a printing press. Printing presses become a very important thing. It was like maybe it's like the internet of the early 1800s. And so when this church gets created, there's the literacy rate is very high. There's a lot of people that not involved in the church that wrote about the church, wrote about things people in the church were doing and saying at the time, right? A lot of the historical records, the biographies and autobiographies of early church leaders have, rely upon letters that somebody might have written to their friend way back when and mention something, right? I know, I was thinking of Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History. I know that there's some, if I recommend, there's some letters written about Joseph Smith by some people that knew him and kind of describing him, because once he becomes famous, they're like, oh, you knew him. So, they're putting information out there. And that level of detail, that level of information, it wasn't around 2,000 years ago. It wasn't around 1,000 years ago, but it was around a couple hundred years ago. And we have records of things that have happened. That makes it more difficult to hide your history for sure. And now with the internet age and everything coming out, that strategy might have been a good strategy at one point in time. I don't think it's a viable strategy in this day and age.
Yeah, it's much harder to have a cult now. That's a strong statement.
I'm thinking about starting a cult. I don't think it's too late.
I think it makes it easier and harder in different aspects. There's some aspects of the internet that make becoming a cult leader, at least, or finding people that are attracted to you and your whatever weird offshoot belief, whatever it is, way more common. That's how QAnon conspiracy, that's how all the conspiracies start, is because it's so much easier to find only a tenth of a percent of people believe this. Well, I have access to 5 billion people. A tenth of a percent is a healthy number of people to start.
But I think the key, though, is the struggle for any group that is led by a charismatic leader is always longevity and the transfer of power. And it always happens difficultly. And so what you see is whenever you have a group and the power is held in a very small place, right? It means that while that person is alive and in control, they can act very nimbly and often do very visionary things. But when that person, how you create an institution that originally started with a charismatic leader is a more difficult thing to do. And whenever you do that in a way that emphasizes the concentration of power, especially in at least Western culture, patriarchal authority, then what happens is there's certain tools that get used over and over and over and over again. Control of women is one. And, that's one of the ways they do that. Unquestioning authority, all of these type, you don't question, you ignore, you let it go away. It's buried. I mean, this is how history has been written for, millennia, especially in the West, because it's a patriarchal culture. But I mean, not that the West has a monopoly on it. It's just present, and I'm more familiar with that history. And you see that the same thing with the church. I thought one of the most interesting pieces of dialogue was when the 70 comes to the jail and he's trying to influence Pyrie. And he gives some context, because I think that context was really helpful, at least for me, to see. He's like, look, the church is having a little bit of a PR crisis, right? We only gave blacks the priesthood less than 10 years ago. We've been getting a little bit of heat about that. We've been getting a little bit of heat about some of these other things. We really have been trying to distance ourselves from the, polygamous Mormons, the FLDS or whatever.
He mentions the ERA, I think.
And that's all right. There's that. There's ERA, right? They were fighting that battle so they were firmly in this culture war battle, and they had not yet fully succeeded, right? So he's talking about Mormonism in the 80s, right? That's when Mormonism was very conservative, very anti-communist and whatever. And so it had taken a hard tack to the right in the couple decades before that. And so that's the language he's going to use. That's the uncomfortable stuff he's getting, because what's going on in America at that time is those types of traditional institutions are getting a lot of heat for a lot of different reasons, because American culture is moving and they are choosing not to move. Whereas before, when Mormons were doing polygamy, they were on the cutting edge of the new and fancy, crazy ideas that were going on in American culture, right? They were the first ones to implement polygamy and interesting sexual relations and things like that. But they kept it for a while. Then they end up abandoning the United States. It's the 1800s. It's a violent time. Again, all of this is meant by way of explanation of how you see where they are from where we are now. It's not as distant. It's still wrong and horrible and terrible and all those different things, and they should have done a better job acknowledging what they did, because you expect more of a religious institution, right? This is why, you can hear about child abuse from people doing child abuse, and it's horrible and awful as it is. However, when priests do it, when scout leaders do it, religious leaders do it, it's that much worse, because these are people that you entrust to make your children safe, right? And so when a religious leader or a religious movement is associated with a massacre, it's worse, because they're supposed to know better, right? These are the people who peddle morals as part of their mission. And so it becomes much more difficult to sweep under the rug and deal with. And it shows a lack of, I don't know. It's hard to find the right words other than abhorrent and just completely morally wrong to not deal with it. But again, that's
the general
the human institution that is any group, right? Church or otherwise. They are also human institutions run by humans who are trying to protect the institution, because they elevate the institution above the people that it's supposedly trying to serve, which is, that's a challenge of any institution. And it's hard.
I agree. I feel like that challenge in institution is definitely more prevalent in the religious domain. You see that to be a much more consistent thread across different religions. But in that moment that the general authority is coming to Pyrie with that, he's doing it in a very threatening way. And this, throughout each episode, the one thing I keep going back to, which again resonates in some level of my experience in the Mormon religion, is this, everyone knows everything. Everybody knows all this tidbit. So when you go to speak to your bishop, he's already gotten this workup on you. So when he goes there, he's trying to use a previous situation where Pyrie did not prosecute a man who was beating his wife and or children, and using that as a almost threat, as like, you didn't do what you're supposed to in that situation, so I don't expect you to do what you're supposed to do in this situation.
Well,
and it's a threat.
Yeah.
That
so I think
is very hard to swallow.
Where there's a one of the critiques that, well, I don't even know if I have to call it a critique. When I look at it, some of the things that don't feel authentic, don't feel like this would really happen, do center around those 70s or the stake president showing up and getting involved in a police investigation.
Really?
Yeah, but
that's off.
Yeah, I don't think that doesn't ring true to me. Maybe that has happened, or what happened. I just don't see it.
This was in Utah.
This was in Utah.
That's the point. Is when you have a culture that is where religion and society are so enmeshed.
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen that. My family has been affected by that. Without saying too much, because it's not my story to tell. My dad has his own business, and there were things that happened in his business where another guy took advantage of my dad and his business and really caused my dad to almost have to file for bankruptcy. And because of connections of this elevated family in Utah, my dad did not sue.
Stand a chance.
And instead chose to, forgive, which, whatever, that was his choice and his decision. But were it set somewhere else, and especially for me as a lawyer, I'm like, again, that's your choice to make. But
right.
There's pressures there that don't exist in other locations.
Right.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say about those visits is, while it doesn't ring true to me that they would be so overt in their actions, I think what is relied upon heavily is that implication, the unsaid threat, the unsaid, this is how, how this is going to go. Kind of like what Casey's saying. I don't need to explain it to you. You know how this is going to go, right? And in enough stories of people who did try and came out on the wrong side of things that you're aware of, or you hear through the grapevine, that it keeps people self-censoring, self-regulating, those things. And so I think it's hard in a TV show to, because that comes from decades of living and being in a community and hearing all the things. That's hard to get across in a couple, even 7 hours of a TV show. And so I think maybe it's necessary to say, even though you may not have a 70 walking in and saying something like that, the threat of a 70 coming in and saying something like that is real, or at least it's felt. It may not be talked about by the 70 themselves, but it might get talked about in a church meeting.
Local.
Yeah. That you don't want to upset the 70. You don't want to, how they're going to be. And the churches, you can almost predict what they're going to say about most things. And so I think that those scenes there are to illustrate kind of what those feelings are, even if they aren't really as overt in real life.
It's going to feel like that. So a Mormon is going to watch that and say, oh, that would never go down like that. However, the way you feel watching that is going to be very similar to how you would feel. Just, it wouldn't be scripted in the same way. But as a Mormon, you're going to feel it like similarly. You're going to feel the power when the authority of the institution when that guy walks in and starts talking to someone, or when you do it in that way. Yep. Like I've heard that before. Ryan knows this. There's someone locally who's like, a 70 came here once and told me I did a really, really good job doing this particular job in the church. Therefore, you cannot release me from this. Right? You can't give me a different job because a 70 told me I did a good job. Therefore, this is my eternal calling type thing.
Yeah. I'm pulling reins.
So to switch topics a little bit, I found a particular line, maybe it was even a throwaway line. I guess there's no throwaway lines in shows like this, but Taba and Pyrie are having a conversation about Diane and like, is she really in Florida? And Pyrie says, well, she's a convert to the church, so she probably wasn't very fond of her home life, so she's not going to go back to New Jersey where she's from. And that kind of struck me because, in the 80s, I don't know if this was as true as it is today, but church religion in general in the United States has been going down. I think religion in the Western world, Europe and whatnot, has been declining. And the areas of growth seem to be, internationally, I think Africa is a big area of growth for many religions. And they probably have different reasons for them. But the converts within the United States, I think I almost want to was that a shot at like the current converts to the church or whatnot? Because it seems like the current people that are coming into the church have a certain amount of baggage
for something.
Yeah, they're maybe running away from something more than running towards something.
Right.
And, 'cause I don't want to, I wouldn't want to talk bad about somebody who chooses to join a religion because it's going to help them be a better person. I'm not interested in that, but I think there was a point in time when they talked about the golden investigator, these people who are just good, the doctor, the lawyer, the accountant, the executive, the whatever, who's just happened to, thinks there's something missing in their life, and gosh darn it, I think Mormonism's right for them.
But have they tried pot? We're from Colorado.
You're from Colorado.
We were about to say, just kidding.
There's lots of things to explore, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I was just wondering if you guys had remember hearing that, and if you did, do you think that was a shot? Was that a critique of who is joining religion in this day and age?
Well, with you bringing it up, yeah, like I am more on the atheist side of these conversations. So
I knew I couldn't trust you.
And could be news to people, but like most of the news,
I'm not
the news, the podcasts, and information that I gather is from that side. And so when I hear the research of the nuns and the atheists increasing and religion decreasing, and where are religious people religions getting more people, it is, from my point of view and from the media that I partake in, it is a kind of preying on the weak, preying on people who clearly need something. And while we may not be able to give you the physical thing that you need, we can at least give you hope that you will find it. And so they go to people that are running away from something, either a bad physical situation where religion can offer them hope in that way, or a bad financial or emotional or mental state where they can have a pre-built community, which is one thing that I think that religion does very well. That community side of things, where if you are running away from your house for, like, literally or metaphorically running away from where you're from, you don't have a community. That is something that religion provides. It's kind of a set thing. You go to this building and everyone there has a thing in common that you can befriend with. You
can go to CrossFit now too. Like, there's communities everywhere.
I cannot go to CrossFit.
Well, the truth. But I'm just saying that I get that. My biggest hang up, and this is very specific to the Mormon religion, is and this was my biggest hang up as a kid, is that you got to give 10% to tithing to be able to fully participate, as well as, being moral to their standards and yada, yada, yada. But I remember being in a Sunday school meeting and they gave us 10 M&Ms. Just had to give one to Jesus. right? And my parents, like, I'd give babysitting money. I gave 10% to the church from the get-go. Like, that was built. And my parents, who worked for every penny they fucking got, right? I can only imagine that they've given more to the church than they ever did to their children's college or basketball in fucking high school. So for me, like, that was a big red flag in the religion, with the financial responsibility that you also had to give. And I get that they don't pay their priest, like, a bishop doesn't get paid. That's a volunteer. It goes to other things. But
I'd be much happier if
for
they
me,
got paid.
that,
Like, if you, like,
that's a red flag.
if you accept 10% of everyone's income, and if you actually had to produce financial statements at the end of each year, which
because we're talking about one of the richest religions in the world, right?
If at the end of every year, your P&L sheet came out as like zero. Yes, we took in millions of dollars, but then we actively turned around and gave that millions of dollars back to help our parishioners, our believers, the people that we say that we're helping serve. I think, like, I would be so much more receptive to that. Like, the reason you're taking 10% is so that you can help people, that you can pay for things. And if one of your parishioner, what did you call them? One of the people that you serve, one of the people that goes to your church misses a rent payment, you can pay that as a, like.
But I think the church does do that.
They don't, I mean, they are one of the.
So my dad was a bishop, and I definitely know that there was,
you just said they're the richest company. Right, so they don't do it enough.
Well, yeah, right.
Or if they paid their people, like the fact that Mormon Church and the Catholic Church are some of the richest companies in the world, that is a red flag. If they took that money and then turned around and gave it back out, I would be way more in favor of that. Like, I don't think that taking the money is the bad thing. I think
just for a question, just a question, because I ask questions for a living on this one. Why? What makes them different than any other company?
Well, they say they're not a company.
Right.
If they came out and just said, I'm a company and I'm in this to make money, fine. That's what Apple does. That's what every
that makes me a profit versus non-profit.
They are a corporation. They're a not-for-profit corporation, and all other.
But they have a profit. They make them. I mean, I get the idea of, like, not-for-profit, like, you can still, but, like, they're not just, like, kind of making a profit. They're, I mean, again, the Catholic Church and the Mormon Church are two of the richest companies in the world. But they don't say they're a company. They try and hide the fact that they don't
pay taxes, right? So they're exempt from that shit.
They're a not-for-profit corporation incorporated under the laws of the United States of America. They're not-for-profit. They don't pay taxes, and they're like any other not-for-profit. And that's why they have to do things like other not-for-profits do, and they're very careful to do that. And I get your point. I think your point actually is a moral point, but it's not a legal one. And because on one hand, they are one of the most successful companies, period, because it's a small known fact that when they did come, the army in the beginning, turn of the century, when it was, when Utah was not yet a state and all of this was happening, the United States did seize all of their assets. So this little religion, company, group, cult, whatever you want to call it, went from having all of its assets seized by the United States government to now being one of the richest organizations on the planet. That's an interesting story, and you can debate all day about why and if it's good or bad. But I mean, I think really the point you're making is a moral one, is that if you are a religion, and a Christian religion at that, and you say your mission is to protect and help the poor and needy, then perhaps, then you have some criticisms of how they are or are not doing.
Well, you don't make
I'm not saying it's,
you don't make contingencies around being able to prosper in that religion, right? So
Right.
I can't go to the temple unless I pay my tithing. So
Sure, you
there's a
can't-
contingency on what I can do within that religion based upon what I pay.
Sure, but if you wanted to get married in a Catholic church, you'd also have to pay a fee.
Right. No, I'm not.
Just not as big a fee.
But no, I agree. Like, I'm not saying anything against what they're doing is illegal. It is immoral for a company that is making their money on morals. Like, that is, I mean, it's on the same level of, or I guess not the same level. I feel like the same idea of Apple getting blowback when it came out that Apple was intentionally making their technology obsolete so that they could sell you more technology. Like, and so they are creating their own income by making what they say, like, oh, yeah, we want everyone to do this, but in order to do this, you have to give us money. Apple is saying, oh, you should really get, like, good technology. Oh, your battery keeps dying? Like, that's super weird. Oh, it turns out we are making your battery die so that you have to buy more technology from us. And then when that was found out, like, they got legal trouble because that's illegal to do that. But I mean, like, that same idea is making money. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, because from the, I can't speak for the church, but if I were
Go ahead.
to look at it from that perspective, right? They're viewing it as we are the kingdom of God on the earth. We have been given these funds as a stewardship. We need to protect the kingdom of God. We need to make sure that some of the things that happened in the past don't happen in the future. We need to protect this. We need to make sure that people can worship, and we need to make sure that the ordinances that we provide to God's children, temples, blah, 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 we can continue to provide those things because those things are so important. But I would also, so I mean, I go, okay, I get that. And you're trying to look at this. They're trying to look at this with a much larger, longer lens than just a human lifetime. However, I mean, this is where I'm going to show my cards, right? I mean, I also think the moral argument is, hey, if you just made multiple billions of dollars during the pandemic, then perhaps you could spread it a little differently. But of course, I'm also not making that choice. But I mean, I think it's a valid criticism. I wish more members of the institution were comfortable raising those questions, because that's the other thing. Institutionally, we're taught not to question, especially financial stuff, right? I mean, I've given them significant amounts to the church. Have I ever really questioned it or whatever? That you're not really
Casey,
do that.
Did the church preface you giving your tithing as you will get that tenfold? As in, like, if you...
In the kingdom of heaven.
If not necessarily in the kingdom of heaven, but almost like karma. Like, if you pay your tithing and you do what you're supposed to, that comes back to you in other riches.
Well,
It might not be financial. Like, that's something that was always drilled in me. Like, you pay your tithing not just to enter the temple, not just to, like, move into different directions, but because it comes back tenfold. Were you guys told that?
Yeah, and there's different ways that they do it. And that's why, for me, I don't feel guilty about the money that I've donated. Because, like, as far as... So, my relationship with the organization of the church, I am totally comfortable saying, hey, you should probably spend this money a little differently. Yeah, I gave it to you. It's your money now. You can do it wherever you want to get it. But my opinion is you should do better with what you've been given by all the widows giving their mites all over the world. There's that. But as far as, like, me and my relationship with, like, do I feel guilty about it at all? I'm like, no. I'm like, hey, God, I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. Therefore, this is what I did. Hopefully it's gone to do good things and stuff. And I've done different things with, ensuring that the church has donated to some of the things that are happening locally. I've chased after those, charitable contributions back towards things,
Followed the money. Yep.
But again, I'm not doing it out of guilt. I do it. I'm like, that's what you should do, and that's what I should do, is to try and help a community. And my connections are with the church that is very rich, so I'm going to try and use those connections to, help the people that are here locally and stuff too. But, like, anyway, that's, again, it's complicated. Money complicates everything, especially in American society, because we have a lot of it. So we have to kind of, what do you do with it morally? And money can be very immoral in what it is, and it makes it really difficult to make those decisions.
Money, I think, takes the cake when it comes to
The root of it.
All right.
Like time when
all immoral things can happen from that stem.
Maybe I'll embarrass Ryan a little bit, but like there was a time when Ryan and I were making decisions about some of those funds, and Ryan was very helpful because he's like, look, Casey, when you're deciding what to do with this money, this system is meant to be abused in the sense that you should err on the side of being over generous to help people who are in need. And I always remembered that, and I agree with that because that is what it is for. Like you want to err on the side of being too generous to someone who is needy rather than too stingy to someone who really needs it. Like
that. Yep.
Yeah. Well,
I think people who have access to those funds, like local leaders, do try and do that. Not all, for sure. And I look at mostly on the local level. Institutionally, I think that like the global church could do much more than it is currently doing with its money. Again, I don't know exactly how much it is and where it is and all that other kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm operating with a scarcity of information, but like as far as like the local level, I think the local leaders really do try to help a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, and I kind of want to move on to some other things, not to put that, but I do.
Yeah, we are late today.
Well,
that was too deep for you, Ryan? Did we stray too far off for you?
No, I actually feel like we all just agree about that, really. Like, they make a lot of money, they should be spending a lot of money. I just think one thing that I've always tried to draw a distinction of, especially when I'm talking to people who aren't really familiar with the workings of the Mormon Church, I see two churches. I see a church at the local level, and I see a church at the Salt Lake level, right? And
that makes sense.
They oftentimes work differently and with different purposes in mind. And some of that is purposeful. And I know sometimes people just have different ideas about things. And the problem, so many good people I've met at the local level who are out there doing really God's work, right? And sometimes the Salt Lake Church gets in the way of that, to be quite frank. But you can't guarantee that that's always what you're going to find at the local level. There's a term that I've heard used. It's kind of like leadership roulette at the local level. You can get some that are good, some that are bad. It just depends on what you get. And if you got some good ones, you're going to think really positively about the church. If you get some bad ones, you're going to think really negatively. My thought is, coming from my background as a job and what I've done for a living, is to say, well, management can do a lot here to make things go in a better direction. And so my critique of...
Where's HR? Do you have an HR anywhere?
Well, my critique of the Salt Lake Church is probably a little bit more pointed than the local level, where I've seen, like I said, great people do great things. So the thing that I wanted to get to is, did anybody notice that Diane made great time from Florida to Utah? Like, she made amazing time. She must have had the pedal down the whole way. She was speeding.
The best station wagon ever.
They were flying.
No bathroom breaks.
No. She took one nap. She took one small nap and just boom, right there. But really what I wanted to say is, when she was driving in and out of Utah, they made a point of showing the state line. And I mean, obviously we're supposed to read into this as a symbolic thing. I'm going into the problem. I'm coming out of the problem. Her Matilda stop off at the state line on the way out. I lived in Utah for a short period of time, but as Casey, I was going to ask you, as a Utahn, do you feel like there's a big significance or a big difference when you either leave Utah or come back to Utah? Does it come with this baggage? Do you feel like it does?
I'm going to have to say no, because I didn't even really notice that. I'm like, what? Like, the only reason I saw them stop the state line is because that's where they threw the murder weapons or whatever and stuff. Like, other than that, like, when they're stopping, I'm like, You don't stop in the middle of the desert in Utah/Nevada. Like, you keep moving.
Right.
You get in Salt Lake.
The vultures to find you? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, like I didn't understand that. I mean, you go across state lines to buy fireworks. You go across state lines because the laws are different. Whatever. Sure, I mean, like,
you're going to bet on some horses.
Sure. I mean, look, my grandmother loved to drive to Wendover, which is on the state line, so she could gamble and stuff. Like, I get it, but it's like it's not that significant. So I never saw it as like a ooh type thing. I was like,
Well, I think with the go ahead.
You might hate me for saying this on a.
I hate you for different reasons. Just go ahead.
You loop me into it, so this might be a consequence of yours. But when I was a very rebellious teen, my parents thought it wise to send me to my brother who lived in Utah for like a week to like get my head straight. Yeah, you recall it? So they send me from Colorado to Utah over the state line, and essentially what my brother taught me was, you dumb, stop getting caught. That was the overall message of my time. With my returned missionary brother, right, living his best life in Utah. I was just like, why are you so dumb? Everything. Like, I swear to God, it was like, could you be smarter? Like, that was the whole thing. And I was like, that's when I loved you, right? That's when this happened.
Hey, if you can't be good, just don't get caught. It's pretty simple. It's a life lesson I try to teach everybody. If you're going to do it wrong, just don't get caught.
But it was also, Ryan, and don't lose sleep over this or anything, but it was also my first time like having a family member that was legit Mormon also be in a gray area, in this sense of like, I'm just not that hardcore, right? Like, I'm going to live my life. I'm in Utah. I'm doing the best I can. I'm fucking making it through it. But if I was 16, you were how old?
24.
24. He's 8 years older than me. But still, that's, if I think about where I was at 24, I would have never taken a younger sibling under my fucking wing.
That's how special I am.
For a week. But I absolutely remember hooking up with like different Mormon friends from Utah that I'd been at like camps with and other things. And the thing I walked away from that experience with was my brother's in the middle of Utah, but my brother's still my brother. It's the same Ryan I've always known my whole life. He's in Utah, but he's still Ryan. Yeah. Right? Like, and if anything, that.
Well, so, and I'll try to. Well, thank you, Jessica. That's
stable person. But
I think that though the sentiment you're expressing there, though, I do think we see in the show a little bit, because this is how they decided to wrap up really the thing, to say that, what's more important, right? They have this thing, and my personal feelings, from your story, is family's more important than a lot of things, including the church at the end of the day. And the church will even say the family is the most important thing. Yeah. They say it in different ways that you might not agree with, but at the end of the day, I think that people can agree that family is very important, and the church echoes that. The problem, though, is that in practice, sometimes the church takes precedent, and I think that's what the show was showing, that you have these mainstream Mormons, and they show Pyrie, and in my there's a lot of Pyries that I've met in my time, but there's also some people left of that are a little bit more practical in their belief system with Mormonism. They're not as stringent as that. And maybe that's because I've spent the vast majority of my life outside of Utah with people that are just outside of that, I don't know, that pressure cooker of what Utah can be. But so I've seen people that interpret the religion differently and more broadly and allow people to have different beliefs, which is, I think, a good thing. But they show Pyrie, who's pretty down the line, holding tight to it. But even then they show like he's forced to pick between the church or his family. And the line between what is church and what is family gets blurred, right? The whole, the 70 coming in and saying this and saying that, the line is being blurred between what is the church, what is good for the church, and what's good for your family. They're trying to say if it's good, what's good for the church is good for your family, which, the show is showing, well, maybe not necessarily. And so I think, there's that whole thing. There's the old joke, at least in Mormonism, that, the Catholics think that the Pope, the Catholics say that the Pope is perfect but don't believe it. And the Mormons say that the prophet isn't perfect but believe he is. And I think that's the same way with families. Like they say the family is more important than the church, but in reality, the way that they go about things, the church would rather you say the church is more important than family. And so I think the show delves into that issue and comes up with a solution that, coming from Alan, maybe it's enough that I love my family. I don't need the church to be a miraculous thing. The miracle is in being with my family, which is a nice way to put a little bow on a fictional story.
Yeah.
I think the practical reality of that is, while it was satisfying, I was very satisfied. I love the scene with his mom at the end. I thought that was all great. I was very happy with it. But if I'm pulling that into what I've seen out here in the real world, that situation tends not to last very long. So what they're suggesting is a couple different things. Either his wife says, I'm going to let Pyrie be Pyrie and we'll just deal with it. Or he's made some sort of peace where he's wound his way through the problems with the church and he's going to be a good church member. We don't know, right? It's ambiguous and great. We can come to our own conclusions. But I think in practicality, there's a lot of unfortunate situations where you have basically a mixed faith marriage where somebody's in the religion, somebody's out of the religion, and it can cause a lot of problems. Not in every situation, of course, but that can cause a lot of problems. Having that duality or duplicity or whatever, I don't know what the right word is, for just different people pulling different ways on different subjects. Like, man, you got to have either a really strong marriage or a really good relationship with your spouse to really make those things work, because oftentimes they do end in divorce. And what Pyrie was saying, like, hey, if I get my testimony wrong, I could be single by the fall, is not unfortunately, it has some truth to it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, is there anything else about the episode that anybody wanted to get into at all? Any other thoughts?
Not necessarily about the episode, so if you want to talk about it later, but kind of going on with the conversation we were having a little bit before about religion in general, or whatever. Mm-hmm. As a question, do you think, or what do you think the chances are of in a couple hundred years or 1,000 years of people looking back at more modern religions, so like Mormonism being a modern religion, Scientology being an example of like a modern, something that formed where there was significant historical data and paperwork and kind of stuff like that, and then looking at how those progressed, and then historians going back to like try and figure out more ancient religions. So Judaism, Christianity, Islam, like, do they use modern religions where they have more information about them to try and go back and see how ancient religions were formed or created? Like, I wonder if that would be...
What's your question?
Do you think that it's possible to do that? Do you think religion forms in the same way? I mean, it seems in the three Abrahamic religions and Mormonism and Scientology that there's that charismatic leader, but they were able to pass from that charismatic leader into the institution. And do you think it would be possible to look at the pathway of religions where we actually have data? We can look at all of the actual stuff that was happening. It was written down. It wasn't word of mouth.
So, to reshape your question, are you asking to, like, will it become almost like a science? Here's how you create a religion.
Kind of, or I mean, like, yeah, more like
what does make a religion?
Yeah.
How do religions get formed? Not how do you create one, but what is whether it's intentional or not? Like, a science, a study of some sort.
I think we could probably talk about it for another episode because that's a long topic. There's a book I would have you read, Kyle, called Sapiens. It's called Sapiens.
Oh yeah,
it's
have
good.
You read it?
I have. Yeah,
that's what it's talking about.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you my short answer.
From me, I will say that I don't shy away from sharing that I have a very Mormon upbringing and that I was baptized in the church. That's not something that, like, I don't share with other people. It's not like it's, in my first 3 lines that I meet somebody, but I certainly never try to hide that. And in that, I've met many of individuals that are either currently active in the church or were or have their own interpretation of what the church is. And within my little community that I'm in, there really isn't a lot of bad things said about the Mormon religion. Whether it was somebody that was previously in it, somebody that's just learning about it, whether somebody's in it or out of it, if anything, if I have a strong opinion, it can be off-putting to somebody who also once was in the church but isn't anymore. And so there is this additional community outside of the Mormon religion that has some kind of connection to it, but isn't fully in it. Yeah. And there's never this negative, massacre kind of conversation, right?
Right.
It's, you can pull some good things out of the religion. So that's my one takeaway. I have zero regrets, not the right word, but zero shame about being raised Mormon.
Right.
Certainly don't have any shame in my current beliefs about being not Mormon, but the community and I'm friends with people that are currently, that it just, the intensity that this 7 episodes show, you're in or out. And I think that's why I liked this final episode, because he was neither. He was both. He was in and he was out. And that's what I loved about the conclusion of this series.
Well, I just wanted to say something about what Kyle was saying. I think that I think in 200 years, the way, what happens with religion, I would say, well, what happens with our society? Because I think religion is more the mirror image of what's happening in society, rather than the reverse being true. I don't think society is is mimicking what religion is doing. I think religion mimics what society does. That's maybe a too overbroad sweeping statement, but that's kind of how I generally look at that. And I don't, with the I think it's going to be hard for newer religions to gain the kind of foothold that even that Mormonism has, just because of the internet age. I think that it's a game changer across the board. And the way that religions formed previously to the internet are they're not going to, you can't guarantee that it's going to happen the same way. I agree with you, Jessica. I think for the most part, you will find people who just hate Mormonism. They hate everything about it, and they're more than willing to go to town on it. I think that the sentiment, and a lot of people within the church, I always felt when I would hear people talking about it, they were always very fearful of what people thought of the church as far as weird beliefs, weird practices, all that kind of stuff, and shied away from sharing that stuff with people. It was very hard. And I think you're right in the fact that if you tell somebody you're raised Mormon, they don't instantly think you're a bad person for the most part, unless they've had a real just bad experience one way or the other. But the majority of people don't. And even the peculiarities of the religion, like I was mentioning earlier when I was talking to some non-members about it, they're like, people that have no real affiliation with it, like, yeah, okay, every religion has the weird stuff. If you're in a religion, you're going to be doing some weird stuff. And so one of the things I learned, in my life, and maybe I've done it to a certain degree or another, is not shy away from it. But at the same time, I never felt like my religion was a defining factor of who I am as a person, right? Maybe some of the moral things, maybe there's some things morally that I came or learned in the church that are part of who I am. But I wouldn't say, first and foremost, I am a Mormon, and then also these other things. And some people, though, have a different relationship with the religion, and that is how they would think to introduce themselves to somebody, maybe. But I don't, if somebody comes up to me and says, I'm Catholic, I'm like, oh, that's a weird thing to tell me right off the bat. I wouldn't expect you to do that unless, but at the same time, maybe if somebody comes up to me and says, I'm Jewish, and if I know they're very like an Orthodox Jew, or they're, some other thing, maybe I'm like, oh, maybe that says something more because I know some Jewish people and I know I've learned some things. So maybe, but if I know less about Catholicism or Presbyterian or Methodist, so if somebody says I'm a Methodist, I'll be like, I have no idea what that means, but thank you for telling me, So maybe that's the same thing with Mormonism as well. And I agree with you. I do like that the show leaves this question open because it does suggest that there could be a place for people that don't have a strict mainline Mormon belief system. And I think in the church today, that is something that's being pushed for by people, is to either have the church give them room to have alternative beliefs, or just saying, I'm going to have alternative beliefs. You do with me what you will, but I'm not changing what I believe. And that comes down to the historical, thing of the Book of Mormon and the various scriptures. It comes through just pretty much every aspect of the church. A lot of people, I think, are, it used to be you're a cafeteria, whatever, a cafeteria Mormon, a cafeteria Catholic, and it just meant you picked and choose what you like and left the rest. And that was seen as a pejorative. It was a bad thing. But I think now people are like, it's not a bad thing. It's the only way I'm going to show up on Sunday, so you better get used to it. And people are making their way in the church that way.
I'd agree with that.
Okay.
That book on Audible, Casey. I will have to. I don't know if I never listened to it or if I just listened to it a while ago, but I do have it. I'll have to give it a re-listen.
It's a good book.
Well, it has been rewritten as a graphic novel too. So,
oh shit! I will get that for my son. My son loves and only reads graphic novels.
What? He's 10.
They're good.
All right, all. I think that there's. Oh. I think there's probably a million things that we can get to. I'm looking over my list of things of my notes I wrote down. There's so much stuff in this episode and stuff, but I've really enjoyed discussing the series with you all. I think I do at some point after some time do an episode with the women, talk about how a woman views these 7 episodes. I know my wife Emily wants to do that. And but we'll just give ourselves some time to breathe before we jump back into it. Again, I've kind of been starting to do some research myself and kind of actually what happened in the book that is based on, at least giving that a read. And maybe there's a whole episode of thoughts on that. Maybe there's not. We'll see. That's to be determined. But we'll get back to regular programming, as it were, here in the future. But I just want to thank you guys all for listening in or watching the show and talking about it. I thought it would be interesting. It has been, and it's nice to have some people to talk about it with. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
You can stick around if you want.
I'm the new host from here on out.
Yeah, please.
Well, we'll see. Let's see if your check clears first.
Love you guys.
All right, love you all. Any parting words, Casey? Anybody else have parting words? I said it all for everybody, didn't I?
Just what you sent me. It's okay to take breaks. I'm gonna stitch that on a pillow. It's okay to take breaks. So if you haven't watched all the episodes, it's okay.
If you're waiting for the last episode and you just happen to be listening to all of our podcasts for it, that's a good advice. Take some breaks. It's okay.
Well, yeah, it's okay to live in a liminal space, sort of in between.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.